Now, if you want a good name for an operation, you really do have to think it through. And sometimes you can get a good name for an operation which doesn't give away what it actually is about. Sometimes, like Operation Sea Orbit, well, you're kind of going for the status of it being called Sea Orbit. You're going for that. In contrast, USS Triton's orbit of the world, which took place in 1960 versus the 1964 of Operation Sea Orbit, has a name which is guaranteed to never tell anyone what they are up to. It's Operation Sandblast. And I'm not sure what machine or human came up with that as a name. I'd like to think it's a human. I'd like to think it's someone has just been finished getting their car derusted. Because after all, if they are involved in this, they might well be a naval person or someone attached to the US Navy who regularly has to go near the coast and so get salt water on their car as an almost regular occurrence. And we all know salt water likes to cause rust, especially on the early automobiles cars. I'd like to think they just had their car sandblasted, the rust taken off, and thinking, right then, I need a name for this mission that no one's ever going to figure out what it is. Operation Sandblast. And there you go. You have a round-the-world voyage, repeating the voyage of Magellan in 1960 by a nuclear submarine which was supposed to go the entire voyage underwater. There are worse things to do. There are definitely worse things to do. And USS Triton is perfect about this. She is the first and only SSRN ever built. For those thinking, hang on, Alex, don't you mean SSBN? Nope. And I don't mean SSN either. Or SSGN. No. She is an SSRN. Stands for Radar Picket. A radar picket submarine. It's a great idea. It's a problematic idea, but it's a great idea. It is a truly great idea. Because the idea is, I need pickets around my fleets so I can see the enemy coming before they reach me. The curvature of the Earth keeps getting in the way, so I know what I'll do is I'll have a submarine with a radar on it. And then what it can do, what it can really do, if and only if it detects the enemy coming, it can dive and get away from them. Admittedly, you immediately lose radar contact at that point. And you also have the issue that, submarine is going to be far closer to the Earth in terms of height of its radar surface of the Earth than a destroyer will be. So it's going to have an even closer horizon against things which are coming at wave-topping height for it. And yes, it's a small target once to get there, but it's going to have a huge, powerful radar. And let's be honest, radars are kind of like lighthouses. They can be seen from a lot further away than you can see from them. Both a good thing and a bad thing, that one, really. Triton is the only attempt to do this. She was, until recently, the largest. There is a dispute as to whether or not her engine reactors make her the most powerful. If they could well do, it depends on how you do the maths of the declassified open sources. And most expensive, well, I'm sorry, that one's been lost a long time ago. Because whilst her value of 109 million in 1959 on commissioning might equate to $1.14 billion today. I'm fairly certain there are Royal Navy submarines which are more expensive than that, let alone American ones. I think you have to seriously pare down on things. Okay, to try and claim she's the most expensive still. Now, she is procured under SCB 132, or as we would often call that, Ship Characteristics Board Design number 132. Which really does illustrate it's a post-World War II Navy, because we're talking thousands of designs they'd been through over World War I, World War II, all those things, and yet this organisation, it's SCB 132. It's a very low number. But still. Shameless book plug. Well, if you've watched my videos many times before, you'll know exactly why I do this. If you haven't, this is the first for you. So, thank you very much everyone who likes, shares, comments on the videos, does all those interactions. They really do help. Thank you very much. They help grow the video, because as I said many times, and I will always be saying, naval history might not be a communicable disease, but love for it I intend to make so, by communicating with as many as possible. And why am I putting my book up here? Why do I advertise my books? Well, I'm a naval historian. I'm an academic naval historian. I have a PhD. And I like to teach at universities. But trouble is, in the UK, getting universities, getting permanent posts, getting even contract lecturing posts, and certainly getting promotion once you're in those posts, is based on publication. It's based on how many your books sell. So, if I don't advertise them, well, no one else is really going to do it for me, are they? So, I do a shameless book plug in every single video. Because I can. So, Operation Sandblast. The shakedown cruise. And that's the important thing to remember with USS Triton, because she has an incredibly short career, even for an early generation nuclear submarine. She's literally commissioned in November 1959 and decommissioned in May 1969. She doesn't even serve 10 years. And she actually, in the middle of that, pretty much has a major refit from September 1962 to January 1964. So, about 16 months of those 10 years, over a year, is in refit. And, of course, there's also this lovely long voyage as well, which she goes on. Which is, as you can see here, is about a little over 2 months. A little over, well, it's 25th of February, 25th of April, yeah. A little over 2 months. We'll go with 2. So, she's an interesting submarine. She really is. She's the largest submarine they build until they get onto the ballistic missile submarines. And she's built the size and shape she is, as said, for a very specific mission. For the SSRN, i.e. the ability to be used as a radar picket. Because it was felt that better than fighting back or defending herself like a destroyer would have to on radar picket duty, she could just slip below the waves and be safe. I've already gotten into some of the issues of that, but anyway, even by the time she's completed, her role is pretty much gone. So what do you do with this ship? What do you do with this boat? What do you do with a vessel like this? Well, then you go for global presence. The US Navy had been looking for a while to make a real fuss, to make a real statement of reach, of capability, to really show off their ability to influence world events. See, the Royal Navy had done this many, many times. The Americans had done this with the Great White Fleet and its crews around the world. They knew the value of it from doing it then. They knew the value of watching the Royal Navy do it on several occasions. sailing around the world as a force does show off a capability. You'll know when we reach, how do I put this, peak threat period, where people are worried about the potential for conflict in the Far East, or with Russia, between Russia and NATO or something like that, because people start doing world voyages again. They are a great method of showing the capability of your navy. So, a Queen Elizabeth class carrier battle group doing an entire circumference of the world without ever stopping in port. Something like that, taking place, will be done. The reason I do a British carrier rather than an American carrier for that is because the American nuke carriers, it's to an extent easier for them to do that because they're nuclear powered, and there's the fact that they've already done that with Operation Sea Orbit in 1964. And, of course, was then followed up by, I think, the Soviet Circumnavigation Award in 1966. I seem to remember it's the same as a very famous event in football in the UK. Or rather, foot the ball, as a friend of mine used to say. I think they got that from Terry Pratchett. So, round the world circumnavigations are quite common. With the Operation Sea Orbit. If the Americans wanted to repeat that, they did something on the 40th anniversary already. 50th anniversary was 2014. 60th anniversary is this year. So I have to do it in about 10 years' time. Do you do anything really on the 70th anniversary? Probably 15 years' time for the 75th anniversary. In 2039. Then they might do it. Then they might do another global orbit. But as said, it's probably easier for the British, because in the 20s there are lots of orbits, lots of global traversing done by Royal Navy ships which are famous as the Empire Cruise and a few others, because it's post-World War I, the Royal Navy's reasserting itself around the world after it had to make the concessions it did to reorganize itself to deal with the German threat, and so it's doing a lot of global traversing. And it's the same with Operation Sandblast, really. It's the Americans settling themselves out in the world and going, look, we are a global navy. Yes, we've had World War II. Yes, we've had Korea. Yes, we've had all the issues we've had with Congress and the debates over whether or not navies need to even exist in the nuclear age. But we are a global navy. We are globally capable. We can reach. And that's the thing about this. It's a presence mission without being a presence mission. You see, traditional presence missions involve you going around ports and going, hello, how are you? We're here. Let's have dinner. Let's chat. Let's show you how big we are. This is a presence mission by going, we went all these places, and you had no idea we were there. We didn't even have any idea we were there. Deal with it. There are, broadly speaking, two kinds of presence missions. One is a lot more difficult to pull off than the other. The presence with visibility mission, and the presence with invisibility mission. One gives you a visible sign of commitment. The other one gives you a constant question of whether or not you're being watched, and how closely you're being watched. One works by showing solidity of friendship, the other one works by, well, basically being a threat. Let's be honest, that's what it is. We don't know you're not there watching us, so we better be on our best behaviour. Ship Characteristics Board is an interesting organisation. It was something I got into a bit of discussion of in a live because they have an interesting history, but at this point they are trying to rectify some of the issues that occurred between the bureaus in the past. They do this by a few different organisational techniques, but honestly, they don't necessarily do the greatest job. Because Whilst they have more power in some ways by being directly and closely associated with the Chief of Naval Operations, they don't have the power of strategic thinking that the previous boards that they replaced, i.e., especially the General Board, they replaced, had in terms of ship procurement. So, in many ways, they duplicate a lot of efforts, especially those being conducted by the bureaus which they haven't replaced and are still around. It's always lovely when there are a few like that. And that gets us into discussing Triton's purpose. As I've already mentioned a few times, she is an SSRN. This means she's a radar picket. For this reason, she is designed to carry a very powerful, very big radar, which you can see in this design. She's also designed to carry a lot of communications equipment, and in many ways, she's designed to spend as much time on the surface as she does underwater. And more importantly, to be as stable as she possibly can, despite her size, on the surface. So, in many ways, she has a more... Well, in terms of hull shape, let's be honest, that looks more what we'd associate with a pre- and even during World War II designed hull than what we'd expect from a post-World War II streamlined submarine-era hull. She's almost a return to the submersible approach because she does have to spend so much time on the surface. And really does have to spend so much time on the surface. But still, an interesting and intriguing vessel. Now, the reason her purpose disappeared was because someone, noticing that the Earth is a round thing, it's rather ball-shaped, one could argue, slightly elongated at certain points, but it's closer to a ball than anything else we can probably approximate. Worked out that, hang on, having a radar low down doesn't really help with the whole curvature of the Earth thing. You know, if it's a curve, sort of like this, and you're here, well, you get blocked by the Earth here. But if you're up here, you can see round it. And I realise that's very, very extreme, but that's giving an example. And so, well, they designed this. I didn't give the usual warning of an ugly aircraft coming. I'm sorry. Let me put it this way. If you take the carbuncle off it, the Grum aircraft, whether they are the Trader or the Tracker, are very good-looking aircraft. I have to say the Tracer, with the carbuncle attached, aka its radar, is not a good-looking aircraft. And it is even worse when pictured from the front. I've done an entire key aircraft video on it as demonstration. So if you want to go watch that, please do. There'll be a link up here. But don't if you haven't eaten yet. Or rather, if you've recently eaten, or if you haven't eaten and you have a weak stomach. Okay? Just don't, okay? I don't want anyone complaining that they've hurled up their dinner when they're watching this video. So this end of service, and immediately... Well, why would you need an SSNR? What's even worse? What is even worse for the Triton? This ended service in 1958. The Triton's actually launched in 1958, so this has been under development while the Triton's been under construction. So the Triton's laid down in 1956. This is already on the planning boards, already being considered. So pretty much, you could say they're insurance for each other. If this doesn't work, okay, we still have the Triton system. But realistically, she is made obsolete before she's even commissioned. Because this ended service in 1958, the Triton's commissioned in 1959. November 1959. So she is well and truly... there's no need for you. There is no need for you to have that massive, great big radar. She is launched with an AN/SPS-26 air search radar. That's a very powerful radar system for a submarine to carry. pretty much it's the same system which was being fitted on the the Sailfish class radar picket submarines. And they had all sorts of ideas about this. They were going to have an entire nuclear carrier battle group, which had about 4 Tritons around. They had plans for conventional boats around conventional carriers and all sorts of dreams. And in the end, the only vessel which is really built is the Triton. And the Sailfish class, well, as cute as they are, they build 2 of them, and they've been planning dozens of such vessels. And realistically, this was always going to be the case. Because, to my mind, a long-range radar, which you have to deactivate and submerge to defend if the enemy are coming for it, and is going to be a prime target, and is going to be an absolute beacon for enemy attacks, is never going to work. I can understand why they had to try. I'm not sure why it ever emerged from the wargaming testing, because I'd have thought, considering US Navy's history of wargaming, they would have done a lot of it to develop it. So let's consider the specifications of the Triton itself. And this will also include a bit of a discussion of the engines. As you can see from all this, she is a large boat. In fact, she's weighing more than some World War II cruisers. And especially when submerged. However, there is a lot of details about it which are subjective and we still don't know. And this is where I'd like to point out something. Okay? Whenever I deal with vessels past World War II, I have a strict policy. The closer they get to the current day, the more I check the sources are open, sort of the information I'm retelling is their open source information, i.e. what is publicly accepted by their governments, what their governments say. I'm not in the business of being war funder. It's not my methodology. It's not my way. In fact, I have a second. I often do a quick check of what are the stats as displayed on Wikipedia, as a backup for checking the resources, and then I check the sources that Wikipedia, if they have sources, has to, that people have found, to check as much open information as possible. However, this gives us a very interesting scenario for this particular vessel. Because, officially, 45,000 shaft horsepower from the 2 steam turbines and nuclear reactors. The captain said he felt she could do at least 60,000 if he pushed her, in a public document. However, in another public document, the government of the United States have admitted that the 2 reactors aboard the Triton were rated for a combined shaft horsepower of 105,000 shaft horsepower. So, yes, we know the S4G reactors were S for submarine, 4 for 4th generation designed by that particular contractor, and the contractor detail comes from the G, which tells it was General Electric. It's an improvement of the S3G, and it's a dual configuration where the 2 reactors are supplying via 2 steam turbines, 2 5-bladed propellers. It is designed for maximum power and speed, whether on the surface or underwater. So what does that tell me about all this? Well, A, the fact that you can run both turbines from the same reactor should you need to. gives it an unparalleled reliability. And frankly, in terms of it going around the world, the reason the Americans do this with this boat is because they're guaranteed it will go around the world, and guaranteed it will come back, and they won't have anything embarrassing, or as close to as they can get with the technology at the time. Secondly, I'm reckoning this boat's details are still heavily shrouded in mystery, and I'm not sure if I believe any of those public sources and publicly traded sources about her real capabilities. I will say this, and I have been forced to say this more often than I'd like recently, but some nations have a habit of minimizing their capabilities in public. Some nations have a habit of maximizing their capabilities in public. As a rule, democracies tend to minimize their capabilities in public because of the fact that if it turns out their capabilities don't live up to the bill of sale, and I'm talking this about countries, not the arms manufacturers themselves, then they tend to find themselves in trouble with all sorts of democratically elected people basically causing them trouble and making an issue over it. Dictatorships or authoritarian regimes tend to be far more keen on exaggerating their capabilities in public, peddling the image of strength, of power, as both an internal political reasons and external political reasons. So, saying that as such, I find this entirely an interesting discussion on this vessel and its capabilities. I would strongly suspect, although I cannot provide any figures, and I will not go into anything more than publicly available information, that the Triton was significantly faster than 30 knots when it wanted to be submerged, and I would say the same on the surface. I know officially it's plus 27 knots submerged and 30 knots on the surface, plus 30 knots on the surface, but I would say I would doubt strongly, based on the publicly available information, because it's giving those speeds based on 45,000 shaft horsepower, presumably, because it's in the same document, not the 60,000 shaft horsepower, which is an increase of a third, or the 105,000 shaft horsepower, which they could apparently potentially generate, which would be, let's be honest, 2 1/3 times it. Yes, hull form does decide a lot. Length to beam ratio and shaping can really affect the speed and maneuverability of a vessel. But at the end of the day, when you're putting down that sheer quantity of power, that's a little bit more. That is a little bit more. Heavily armed. The last boat to actually have built for the US Navy to have stern torpedo tubes. Last boat to be built with them. Modern submarines do not get stern torpedo tubes. The whole point being, if you got close enough that you're on their stern, there's a big problem. Why? Why does she have this system? Because again, I think this hull, this shaping, is a hark back to an older time. Is a hark back to the idea she could be on the surface, that she could have to fight something and run away. I'm almost surprised she didn't have a gun on her deck, honestly. Or something to provide some sort of air defense. It's a really, really interesting design for a nuclear submarine, and of course it is a unique scenario. No one's ever really thought of using submarines for that after that. What they have used them for is electronic warfare and information gathering that way. There have been multiple submarines developed at various points, usually adaptations, but occasionally individual vessels have been developed for the role of basically electronic warfare. But again, this has been, and by electronic warfare I mean listening masts. But again, this has been something which has been slowly included into the functionality of periscopes and other systems which submarines have as a standard fit. In fact, most submarines can now do something of that mission, and something of this mission. Although you really wouldn't want them to. I do think if it had come at a later time, if it was a design which had sort of carried on, I could imagine things like enhanced Sea Sparrow or cam being fitted in sails and that sort of scenario. And the sails, of course, I'm referring to as the conning tower, the sort of the position that comes up. It's a really interesting thing, and I have to admit, today's question will be, well, let's say the Americans decide they want to continue with this idea. Yes, they might have the tracer. Yes, they might have it as a capability, as a very capable aircraft, but they decide they want to continue this as well, and then decide a policy of having one of these for every one of their carrier bower groups. What do you think a modern one would look like? What kind of things would have led to? There's only so quickly you can dive, but I suppose they could design it to be very, very quick to dive. But again, I am very tempted by the idea of having some sort of surface-to-air missile system fitted. I would, especially something which can be launched from beneath the water. And again, that's nothing unusual. There are Soviet submarines which had that fitted and have that fitted to this. Russian submarines now, I suppose, which have that fitted to this day, and they're an interesting system. I suppose if you're being detected and searched for by aircraft with magnetic anomaly detectors or something like that, it's a way to maybe start taking them out. It certainly in the Cold War was perhaps less of a capable idea because there were far more of those aircraft going around, but as the aircraft numbers have decreased because of the post-Cold War budgets and the beliefs that the world was going to be peaceful, or at least wars were only going to happen when to major powers when they chose to wage wars. This is despite the legacy of the Falklands War and many other conflicts in history. Potentially, they have got a more viability now. I suppose you can argue it's quicker to build aircraft than it is submarines, and that is true, but you have only a certain number of aircraft. You have to fit this equipment out to them, and losing the aircraft, losing the crew, that's a large chunk of loss when you consider force sizes these days. Again, larger force structures enable taking far more of a loss because you can regenerate far easier from, let's say you have a force of 60 aircraft and they have crews of 12, that's 720 personnel in active service. You probably have more as instructors and trainers and people who are recently graduated. So let's say you probably have a pool, in terms of experienced people, of some region of 1,000 personnel. So if an aircraft gets lost and you quickly rebuild it, you can probably find another crew of 12. You can probably generate that from trainees, from getting instructors or other people, train people back, and you can generate a very viable crew very quickly. If you have a group of, let's say, 6 aircraft, so you have 72 personnel currently flying, you might have a pool of 100, 120 instructors, trainees. Well, if you take instructors from the instructing pool, then you can't train anymore. So they're suddenly out. You don't want to send brand new trainees up in an aircraft with nobody experienced. you have to ransack your current crews, change them in the middle of war, change those groups of which are operating together, insert trainees, and to generate this new crew. And also, well, if you've lost one aircraft from 6, that's a 16.5% or so chunk of your force gone. You've lost an aircraft from 60. It's not nice. You don't want to lose any aircraft, but you've got a lot more to do. It's not really scratched. A little over 1% one and a half, 1.66% of your force. It's something you don't want to do, but it's not going to affect your force generation that greatly. And that's ultimately the reality. You see, the problem with all of these systems, and problem with a lot of modern ideas about systems, and a lot of the cost of modern systems, and I'm adding this into the Triton because the Triton's a good example, because people sometimes point out and try and make out it's the most expensive submarine ever built and things like that, and it's really not. Cost was originally estimated to be $78 million, and, well, it ends up being a fairly large chunk more than that. That's unsurprisingly, really. Is really unsurprising considering how overpowered and how capable it was being built to be, and what it was, the fact it was the only one being built to do its role. But often the first of any program is the most expensive, the first ship, because of the research that goes into it, the experience. It's all a learning curve. It's all going to be more expensive. You are most likely to make mistakes you will have to correct in the first of a class. So one of the things we do today when we have shorter build cycles of equipment is they come out being far more expensive. And there's often a case of, well, let's try and spread this out amongst allies and have all allies have to expand it. And that is a good idea, but that doesn't solve the problem of critical mass of a nation's own force strength. Security, like insurance, costs. But let's be honest, war costs a lot more than deterrence. Maintaining an adequate diplomatic service, maintaining an adequate military, naval, army, air force, all these things, that's a lot cheaper than the price of war. For the economy and for the population and culture as a whole. And to do that, you do need a certain quantity, because it has a quality all its own. And here is another profile design. You've seen the picture I've shown you earlier of it in the water. Well, this is a drawing of it. And again, it shows the bow, it shows the shaping of the hull. This is very much a vessel which is designed to be fast underwater, but stable above water. As stable as you can make a submarine. There is a sort of a certain level of stability you can achieve. Its reactors are mounted in the same part of the hull in series. And its engines, turbines, are mounted after that. And again, the reactors can power each turbine, both turbines, individually. A twin shaft design is also something which is pretty unique in nuclear submarines in American terminology. She's a big boat with a lot of space, which again fits her because she was going to have a large number of crew. If we consider she's going to have 172 officers enlisted in the radar picket role, this drops down to 159 officers enlisted in the attack role. Now, I can make jokes about dropping 13 personnel not being a lot, but in the kind of confined space on a submarine, even one the size of Triton, that's a lot less. That's 13 people you're not providing 3 meals a day for 3-4 months. That's 13 people who aren't also using the what we call hotel facilities, the accommodations, the showers, the mess spaces. That's 13 extra people not using up oxygen. It adds up to a lot is saved when you have gone down that many. So let's consider the mission. And the mission is an interesting profile because honestly, the Americans were very much aware of what they were aiming for and what this mission was for, and they select the personnel accordingly. In fact, I think this mission was planned from well before she's given it. This is where I introduced the document down below. The document down below, there's a link to, is the USS Triton SSRN 586 from NavySource.org's archives, its first submerged circumnavigation in 1960. And it is a wonderful report produced by her captain. And her captain, I'll be getting to in a second, Edward L. Beach Jr., is afflicted with a skill and afflicted with an interest. He's a historian. You can tell he's a historian from the way he writes. You can tell he's a historian from the books he publishes later on, and has already published when at this point in his career. And whilst he also writes some novels, etc., he is very much of a naval historian inclination. And he has a habit of organising stuff appropriately to this. So he does. He really does. So with that in mind, let's consider how he sets the scene for his mission. And again, there's the link up there. The link is down below. I'm going to keep emphasizing the link is down below. During the live, I did a lot of reading from the mission logs. I'm not going to do that as much in this video because I will read a bit of them, and I read small sections of, but if you want to read them, please go read the document yourself. And the reason I'm saying that, reason I'm honestly saying that, is because NavSource and quite a lot of these organizations that put this up are able to prove their reason for existing by the number of people going and downloading the documents, by the number of people interacting with their site. It's a really useful source for historians like me, but it's also a really useful source for anyone who's interested in the topic who wants to go and read these things. And it's also a very useful thing for when you want to get other organizations to start digitalizing their sources and their documents so that people can go and download and read them. Things like the UK National Archives, etc. So, on this occasion, whilst I did more reading from it live, and I'm going to do a little bit of reading from it in this video, I'd really like it, if you're interested and you want to hear more, if you clicked on the link in the description below and went and downloaded it and read it for yourself. I'd really like you to do that. That'd be a really kind thing for you to do for both me as a historian, feel like I'm spreading primary sources with people and sharing that, and for them as an organisation to go, oh, people are interested in our documents. And so more will hopefully be put up. That's the thing we want. We want more information so we can do more. We can analyse more information and get history as accurately remembered and as accurately lessened as we can, so people learn what the truth from history, the real lessons from history, rather than mirages from history. On the 1st of February 1960, returned New London, tests completed. Received orders for the commanding officer to be in Washington on 4th of February for an important conference. In company with the commander, Submarine Squadron 10, the CO called at headquarters, Commander Submarine Force, U.S. Atlantic Fleet. There, under the strictest secrecy, it was learned that a submerged world circumnavigation might be ordered. At the appointed time, the conference met in the office of Vice Admiral Wallace M. Beakley, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Fleet Operations and Readiness. Also present was Navy Hydrographer, Captain H.G. Munson, Rear Admiral L.P. Ramage, Director Undersea Naval Warfare Division, plus the head of OpNav's Atomic Defense Section, representatives from Commander-in-Chief Atlantic Fleet and Commander Subfleet Atlantic, and others. For purposes of geophysical and oceanographic research and to determine habitability, endurance, and psychological stress, all extremely important to the Polaris program, it had been decided that a rapid round-the-world trip in touching the areas of interest should be conducted. Maximum stability of the observing platform and unbroken continuity around the world were important. Additionally, for reasons of national interest, it had been decided the voyage should be made entirely submerged, undetected by our own or other forces, and completed as soon as possible. Triton, because of her size, speed, and extra dependability of her 2-reactor plant, had been chosen for the mission. I declared Triton could sail as soon as additional stores were loaded and the special equipment required for the voyage installed. The conference then resolved itself into small groups concerned with the several projects and problems. Well, it rather does its own explanation. The only thing they're leaving out is we are then going to shout this around the world that we've done this, and we are going to use that to really strengthen our position in the world. It's about the Polaris program. It's about underwater hydrography, i.e. what is down there that submarines might run into. It's about exploring a part of the world which was becoming increasingly important. And also exploring the avenues of manoeuvre in that part of the world that was becoming important, i.e. the world underwater. You have to remember again, submarines prior to World War II and even during World War II spend so much of their lives on top of the surface that, as I always make the point, and will continue to make the point, they are basically submersible torpedo boats. They are not submarines. They do not live underwater. They merely exist underwater. They are ambush predators who adopt an ambush posture to attack. They are not hidden predators, constantly coming out of the darkness. No, they go into the darkness. There is a great quote which is appropriate. In this scenario, Bane is the nuclear submarines that are now emerging at this point in history, and Batman is the submarines that were used in World War II. And Bane, remember, says this quote to Batman: "Ah, you think darkness is your ally. You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it, molded by it. I didn't see the light until I was already a man. By then it was nothing to me but blinding." Submarines of World War II, submarines of the early 1940s, in late 1940s, early 1950s, they adopt the dark. They use the dark. This undersea. Nuclear submarines after this period, they are of the dark. They are as big a sea change in undersea warfare as we are probably about to see with the growth of uncrewed systems assisting them, turning every submarine from a lone submarine into its own wolf pack. We don't know how long that transition is going to take. That's the likely transition coming. We know how dangerous wolf packs used to be, but coordinating them gives away your position when you've got multiple submarines involved. And that's the worry again with uncrewed assets, which is why they became lone assassins of the undersea. This is going to be as big a change, and you cannot overestimate the change. And the Triton's voyage, Operation Sandblast, was a way of signifying this change, a way of trumpeting this, and getting this done first before the Soviets, getting this done first before anyone else. That is a big thing. It is a critical thing. And here we have the captain chosen. Now, I would like you to look at this man, Edward L. Beach. He had quite a career. He'd already written Run Silent, Run Deep, which is, of course, a fairly popular book, and turned into a movie only 3 years after its publication of the same name. Dust on the Sea and Cold is the Sea were also his books. They were written after Operation Sandblast. But he also wrote his own memoirs. He wrote the memoirs of his father, who had been a very senior admiral, an experienced officer in the US Navy, and wrote a number of history texts. A number of history texts. He's a very experienced submariner. By this point, he has commanded many submarines. His first command had been the USS Piper, which he assumed command of in June 1945. He commanded her for a third war patrol. He was at sea in her when the war ended in August 1945. Actually in Japanese waters, still when the formal surrender was signed in September 2nd. He earned 10 decorations for gallantry, including Navy Cross, 3 unit citations, and participated in 12 war patrols that damaged or sunk 45 enemy vessels. And he carried on. He carried on after that. He was a very experienced submarine officer, and he kept being promoted, and he kept getting more experience. But he is very much a captain. I would say it's a kind of a strange thing he doesn't get promoted to admiral. He has time on Naval War College. He has time at the White House. He has time with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He does all sorts of operations and sections in his career which you would normally treat as someone who is going to very senior office. But, he's even the Stephen B. Luker Chair of Naval Science at Naval War College after he retires from the US Navy in 1966. He's the first person to hold that position. And he was editor of the Naval War College Review while holding that position. This is someone who should have gone on to far higher things. So the question becomes, why didn't he? And honestly, when you start reading this record, the record I've linked below, you get a real feeling that his crews are have become as much a family to him as anything else. But also he is very conscious of the life you miss out of as a submariner. I almost wonder if there's two options really. He either seriously upset people in the Navy, which he doesn't seem to have, because he seems to have had a very, very good relationship with them even when he left. In fact, in 1963, he's up for selection to Rear Admiral, but Eugene Parks Wilson beats him out for it. And he could have still made Rear Admiral, but he's serving in the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations, and he's assisting National War College and all sorts of things. He even commanded Submarine Squadron 8 from 61 to August 62 after he does this voyage. So I think he goes for Rear Admiral. I have this feeling. And then he's sort of going, well, he hasn't got it, and he very congratulatory to the person who gets it, and is sort of thinking, I don't know what I want to do. And I wonder if he decides over the next 3 years he'd like more of a family life. It's something in his writing, in his books. It's just the sense I'm getting. I cannot speak to him, of course. I am not a psychologist. I have never met him personally. But I'd like to say you get a feel for someone when you read enough of their works. You get a feel for them as a human. And when you read enough of their reports as well. And I honestly get the feel from him, the more I've read it, especially over the last week after doing live, the more I get the suspicion that maybe it wasn't a case of no one wanted him to be an people didn't want it. Someone didn't want him to be an admiral. It was more a case of he didn't want to be an admiral. He wanted the family life. He'd seen his father be an admiral, so he knew how much of your life gets taken over by the service in such a role. So, the route selected. It's the route of Magellan. Roughly speaking, it's not a perfect reincarnation of Magellan's route, and there are lots of things added in to provide a good route for a submarine. There are lots of routes which the surface vessel could take, but a submarine underwater couldn't take. And this is great photos, and this is from, of course, the document, which if you've got a link you've seen. And this is him. This is a beach plotting out the route. And I'm fairly sure this is an entirely staged picture after he's already worked out the route and has mapped it out. Because, yeah, I have sincere doubt that it was just so calm and quiet, and him with little notes just doing it. I'm fairly certain there was his navigating officer, his probably deputy navigating officer, his XO, and more than likely a couple of the hydrographers who were going along the journey to help them with some of the data and information they were going to gather, involved discussing the route and working it out. I'm fairly certain it was a far larger group effort than that picture would suggest. And once you have a route, well, then you go, don't you? And, well, the passage is recorded in detail. And that is also in a lot of detail. For example, I can tell you on Monday, 29th of February, this morning, Commander James E. Stark, Medical Corps, US Navy, our atmosphere control analyst, as well as our ship's medical officer, in charge of the health of the crew, asked to see me about a serious problem which has arisen. J.R. Poole, Chief Radar Man, has been having excruciating abdominal pains for several hours, and it is Jim Stark's conviction that he has a kidney stone. Apparently, Poole has been suffering a milder ache for several days and had not reported it, hoping it would go away. This has not been the case, and he's now in serious pain. My profession as an officer of the United States Navy has not heretofore required me to know much about kidney stones, but insistent questioning of Jim Stark and a few moments of quick research in an encyclopedia, remember those? The very useful books you used to have, which had all sorts of information in them, give me a pretty good idea of the problem. Poole may have had an unsuspected kidney stone for some time and never known about it. But once it starts to pass, it must either pass all the way through, or else serious complications will result. The passage of the stone is usually accompanied by severe pains of exactly the type Poole is experiencing now, and the only thing to do is to ease his discomfort as much as possible, and wait. In the meantime, I'm faced with the problem of what to do in case Poole does not pass the stone. The equipment required is standard in any hospital, but we do not have it on board ship. Where can we take Poole if he needs more attention than Jim Stark is equipped to give? And will we have to surface to get him there? Will our submerged record be ruined on this account? Goes further. 10-15 hours. Trouble comes in pairs. Our thermometer, which has been operating continuously since departure from the States, is suddenly out of commission. This equipment, perfected many years ago by our Navy, has been so dispendable for so long as to be taken almost for granted by all ships. Our normal practice is making a transit, except when attempting to avoid sonar detection, is to take and record a sounding every 15 minutes. For this particular cruise, a precision depth recorder, or PDR, has been installed, which takes a sounding approximately every 30 times a minute and records the same on a piece of specially prepared paper, thus producing a continuous record of the bottom profile along our course line. It is the PDR which found the previous uncharted submerged sea mounds along our track. Now, however, the thermometer is out of commission, and my anxiety about Poole is compounded by worry of it. Fortunately, at the present time, we are in an area where the water is deeper than normal for the Atlantic, and for a number of hours there is worry about unexpectedly scraping the top of some unsuspected submerged peak. But we will want that thermometer badly as we approach Cape Horn. It's also apparent that submarines need thermometers more than other ships. The biggest surface ship will rarely worry about water known to be deeper than 100 feet, but our modern deep-diving submarines need many times that much. 1500 hours. Progress report on Pool indicates no improvement yet. The trouble folder, however, has been glazed as a transformer and 2 crystals, blown in receiver. Most probably because of insufficient cooling. 1900 hours. Pool has been asymptomatic for several hours now, and may have passed the stone. We won't know for some little time, but it does look hopeful. 1915 hours. We've been running gradually shoaling water all day long. Searching ahead and both bows with our echo ranging sonar. Due partially to anxiety regarding the thermometer and partially to unfamiliarity with effects to be expected. A great number of possible contacts, upon close investigation, are evaluated as schools of fish, temperature anomalies of the water, or possibly pinnacles well below our actual depth. In the meantime, what had started out as a rather quick replacement of parts has become a lengthy repair. The water has commenced to shoal rapidly according to the chart, and navigational worries are commencing to assume greater proportions when compared to medical or nuclear worries than they had a few hours ago. This time, good news is reported. Our thermometer is at last back in commission. It may be lacking a little in power because of the deterioration of the transducer, but it works very well. The precise depth recorder also is back in commission, and we lay on a rigorous program. It's probably needless to say to watch both carefully from now on. 2200 hours. The good news as well as the bad comes in batches, it seems. All indicators are that Poole has passed his kidney stone and will be restored to duty in full vigour in a matter of hours. I would love to say it was all over, but literally the very next detail, which starts on the 2nd of March, starts, Poole is having another attack more severe than the last one. Maybe not past the stone a few hours ago, despite all indications to the contrary. Or as Dr. Stark points out, there may be more than one kidney stone involved. This is one of those things, it just provides so much detail and so much information. There's also submarine contacts and other things in the story in it. But, you know, you get to really know the crew, and you get to have a real idea and the dilemmas of the captain. He is not short in coming forward with the full facts of, these are decisions I have to make. You know, it's almost like it's not just a history, but it's also a lesson for people above to go, this is what we're sending our submariners to do. This is decisions they have to make. They're going to have to think about. Health-wise, and all sorts of matters of fact. And then later on, and this is where he really shows through he's a historian, 27th of March 1960, Sunday, he writes, we shall soon be passing through our nearest point of approach to the presumed location in which the first Triton was lost in action during World War II. As a matter of interest, this took place almost exactly 17 years ago, and by strange coincidence, the first Triton departed on her last patrol from Brisbane, Australia, on the same day, 16th February, as we, her namesake, departed from New London on this voyage. Triton, first, is presumed to have been lost as a result of depth charge attack by 3 Japanese destroyers on 15th of March 1943, in a position almost exactly 800 miles due south of where we are now. At the time, I was engineer officer of Trigger 1, likewise lost in action later in the war, and then Lieutenant Commander R.S. Benson, USN, was skipper. On 15 March 1943, as it happened, we were on patrol in the same general vicinity as Triton 1. Correlation between the known facts of Triton's loss and Trigger's reported events of that day indicate the two ships, unknown to one to the other, may have attacked 2 convoys very near to each other, or even separate segments of the same convoy. Trigger believed she had sunk one ship and damaged a second, and Triton's results, of course, were unknown. We were depth charged, though not severely this time, but afterwards we heard distant depth charges for approximately an hour. Japanese records that the depth charging heard by Trigger most probably accounted for the loss of the old Triton. Their report of the action contains a notation that a large amount of oil came to the surface, in the centre of which floating objects were found bearing labels made in the USA. It was Triton's 6th patrol, but the first for her new commander, Lieutenant Commander George K. Mackenzie, Jr. Despite her skipper's inexperience, she carried an unusual array of talent in Lieutenant Commander John Eichmann, Executive Officer, Lieutenant Commander Jack R. Crutchfield, who was, I believe, engineer. Eichmann, in particular, had been with the Triton since she was commissioned in 1940. His name is engraved upon Triton's old commissioning plaque, presented to us by Mrs. Lent, the widow of the late Rear Admiral Lent, who was the 3rd commanding officer of Triton, last November 10th. The plaque is now mounted in passageway outside our wardroom.
Without too much fact on which to base my supposition, I always assumed that John Eichmann had been slated for transfer to his own command, possibly to be brought back to the States for a new construction submarine, as was custom for people who had been spent a good long time in the war zone, and that he'd either been persuaded to remain for one additional patrol, or very likely had volunteered to do so, in order to provide some kind of continuity for the new skipper. I had met Eichmann in 1939 when, as an ensign, I spent a day at sea with the S-25 to which he was attached. Without conscious intention, I'd kept track of his whereabouts ever since. A year after the loss of Triton, after I had been executive officer of the Trigger for the Southern Time, this almost identical situation occurred to me, except the Trigger survived her most serious depth charging and returned triumphantly to Pearl Harbor. But all during the ordeal, I kept hearing the parting words of the chap who left Trigger in my place. "You'll be sorry you didn't go, Ned. You'll be sorry." The Japanese depth charges, click, wham, swish, said the same, and I kept thinking of Jack Eichmann. My name was also the last one on the commissioning plaque. They actually carry out a service for the ship, which was for the boat, which was lost. They do a lot of things like this during the voyage, and it really gives you an insight into the life of a submariner, and it just makes it even more worthwhile reading. It really does. I cannot overemphasize that this is a report you should go and read to get some real insight to a submariner's career, because this is a report which is originally not written for an audience other than the Navy. Who they choose to share it with is up to them, but it's written for the Navy. So it's not got any artifacts in it. It's not got any stuff in it which is written with a wider audience in mind. It's not blowing things up to get sales. It is exactly the experience. It's worth a read. It truly is. And it carries on and on and on. There is just so much in it. 11th April 1960, he writes, a message from ComSubPac relays information from ComSub Atlantic, announcing prospective promotion of Chief Petty Officers Bennett, Blair, Hampson, Hardman, and Loveland to the rank of ensign, and the following first-class petty officers to the rank of Chief Petty Officer: Hoke, Meaders, Leham, Mayfair, Pat, Stott, Bloomingdale, Flasco, Fickle, and Tambling. There is jubilation amongst the lucky advancement winners, and good sportsmanship amongst the others. But this can't be the entire promotion list, since examinations were held before departure for all rates down to third class. More important and more information should be forthcoming soon. 5 ensigns and 10 chief petty officers is a tremendous haul for any single ship, particularly one with a crew of only 159. It is a tribute to the overall capability of our crew and to the hard effort of the men themselves. The fact that it was done with an extremely heavy watch-standing schedule during strenuous overtime preparation for an unusual cruise adds to their accomplishment. The opportunity for hazing some of the lucky ones is too good to be missed. One by one, they are all called before me to be asked in a grave voice, "What have you done to cause ComSublant to send a message to us about your actions?" The look of incredulity on the faces of the first ones to arrive is real enough, but all ships have a sort of extrasensory communication amongst the crew, and I doubt if the last few were particularly perturbed by my feigned severity. That's a good captain. One of the things you learn reading through this is the importance of a commanding officer to never miss an opportunity to try and keep morale high in their crew. And he really does his level best the entire way through. He really does. The results of the mission were fairly straightforward. They actually proved a lot of ideas for how to operate submarines. It provided evidence which meant that they decided on psychological grounds to retain smoking on submarines for years. We can all think about that particular fun. Look, I don't smoke, but I don't have any objection to people who do. But I do think the scenario of smoking in a confined space where you don't have necessary access to fresh air
Especially a space like a submarine, which can have all sorts of interesting chemicals being contained within it without, in case of getting rid of them, to be something I would just find worrying, okay? I just admit, I know it was widespread, I know lots of navies did at the time, but the mere concept of it scares me now. Knowing all I do about the battery issues some American and British submarines were having, and let alone the Germans had, the toilet issues they had, the various fumes given off by various systems that they had. Smoking inside a submarine, knowing all that, I realised that they did it lots of times and they were perfectly fine. Just you can know too much. You can literally know too much and be looking back at some history going, I'm honestly surprised any of you survived. I'm honestly surprised. The results also found a huge amount of data on the undersea floor of the route they passed through, and it helped really grow understandings for submarine operations and also what they needed for submarine operations to try and make them safe in that deep water working. So why did it matter? As said at the beginning, its presence, its image. It's doing it first before anyone else. And also, there is a sense of accomplishment from doing it. Yes, they're a hand-picked crew. Honestly, I'm fairly certain that the entire reason Triton is being completed is to do this mission. And picking a captain like Beach, a crew which are quite obviously hand-picked, because let's be honest, he's quite right when he says, a small crew getting this level of promotions is unusual. It is! I've checked. Which suggests to me the entire crew, to an extent, is hand-picked for this duty. As much as they were able to, anyway. Putting it all in one thing? Yeah. This mission matters because by achieving it, they're saying the nuclear submarine has come of age. We can now do this. We are true submarines now. We're able to go around the world underwater. You will not see us. We can slip beneath the waves just outside our port, and you will have no idea where we are until we rise up above the waves again when we are returning home into that port. It's not just the very needed information for the Polaris, the deterrent submarines. It's the needed foundation for every modern submarine operation. It's what is required. And that's it, ultimately. The fact that Triton doesn't last long in service, the fact that there is a park made around her, and a very random part of America, really. I really couldn't see why that place was particularly chosen for a park, but they did. They got it. They set it up. But I think this image really, for me, shows exactly just how different she is to attack submarines at a time. That is an attack sub. That is a slightly more recent vessel. And this is Triton. That's what submarines are supposed to look like in this period. That's an older design, adapted and improved. This is Triton. As said, the question is this. The question that I'm asking at the end of this video. What happens if the USN decides to keep up with the Tritons? Like Triton likes, and decides that every carrier, every nuclear-powered carrier, every carrier fleet, task group, has to have a Triton-like submarine, an SSRN. What do you think the world becomes like? Do you think other navies have them? Do you imagine the Royal Navy has one? Or two? Or three? Let's be honest, there's quite a period where everyone's copying what the USN does, so do the French have them? Do the Russians? Does everyone have one? Do they still have them today, do you think? Will they have evolved into something else? I'd be interested to hear what you say, I think. I really would be. For coming up, we have treaty carriers coming up this week. Hope you're going to enjoy it. Should be a fun video. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you liked. If you like, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps to grow the interaction with the channel. There's Patreon, Ko-fi, and all those things around here, including membership of the channel you can do if you want to support the channel, support the acquisition of books. And that's very good of you if you can, because frankly, there are always more books I want to buy. My Amazon list is never ending and always growing. Thank you very much, and take care.